We live in a world that feels increasingly divided, where one wrong word can feel like a spark in a dry forest. Often our bodies react to a difference of opinion as if it were a physical threat, locking us into a cycle of fight, flight, or freeze. But what if the goal of a conversation wasn't to win, to convince, or to align? What if the goal was simply to understand the human being standing across from you?
I've engaged in many difficult conversations over the last several weeks.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about that vulnerability piece. Like I've been talking about it in the form of trust, but I hadn't been thinking about it from a vulnerability standpoint. And looking at it from that place, I can now start to see why I'm feeling frustrated, because I'm someone who gives trust easily, but you break my trust and we're going to have issues.
Yeah.
Today, Chris and Jen dive deep into the science of our triggers, the power of vulnerability, and how choosing curiosity can bridge even the widest chasms. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning.
Where self-care meets real life.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Jen.
And welcome back to another fun and exciting episode.
Welcome. We're so excited you're here today.
If this is your first time listening, we would love for you to join our community. You can hit that like, follow, subscribe button on whatever platform you may be finding us on so that you can come be part of our conversations. We're building this community based on our own need to further these conversations in our real lives.
Yes, we would love that. And today we're going to talk about difficult conversations, the art of a difficult conversation. But before we do, let's start with gratitude. And Chris, I can kick us off because I was prepared this time.
Love it. I will let you take the reins.
I'd like my green star for that, my little gold green star. I was thinking, doing my kind of daily reflection as I try to make intentional time to think about what I'm grateful for, because I think it's a great practice. That's why we do this, to just not miss out on all the wonderful things that happen in life. And it just occurred to me, like, I am incredibly grateful for my hands. They click the button on the camera to capture the photo moments that bring me so much joy.
Yeah.
They reach out and pet the dogs and feel their soft fur. They moderately accurately type out all the things coming from my brain when I don't have to use my mouth to say the words. They, they do so many things throughout the day. I ask so much of them. And just without even thinking about it, my hands enable me to be living the life that I live. So it's really easy to just fly on by and forget how much better they make my life. But I'm really grateful for my hands. So hands, thank you for everything you do.
Round of applause for hands everywhere.
Round of applause for hands.
Well, my gratitude moment, we don't judge gratitude moments. So there we go. I'm starting with that. I'm grateful for us being on this journey together, because I'm going to just kind of use this as our springboard into our conversation today, because I've recently was in a conversation with someone who we do not agree on many things. And it was because of a lot of the conversations you and I have had about like being curious and about understanding like how our bodies and minds are reacting. And so, we had a conversation back in November around like how to have difficult conversations without losing respect or connection. As I reflected back on this moment, or in this conversation with this individual, it was multiple people actually that stayed around. When I was looking back, I was grateful to be able to say, like, in those moments, I was able to identify some things. I was able to kind of move myself out of this fight or flight mode and really like lean into the conversation. And I don't know if I would have been able to really been in that space back then.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I want us to talk about today, because in this conversation with the individual, it was, we were in a family setting, and, they tell you growing up not to, discuss what religion, politics, any odd health ailments, whatever.
Yeah.
And so we were actually talking politics, and we are on very different sides of the political spectrum. And in that moment, it's so easily, I could have just like gotten up and totally removed myself from the conversation. I did not need to stay. I did not, like, it was not worth really anything to me to be part of the conversation. But I've thought back to many of the conversations you and I have had, both recording the podcast, but also in our personal lives, around seeking to understand people and seeking to understand where they're coming from and how they make choices and how they decide to live life. And I decided to choose curiosity in that moment, and suspended kind of my trying to change this person's mind, trying to influence them in any type of way, and just truly seek to understand the journey that they had been on in this. And several people walked away from the conversation as we were getting started, but there were a couple other family members who stuck around. And it was just really cool to be in this space of people having a genuine conversation without really getting it could get a little defensive and a little heated sometimes, as I'm sure you can imagine. But then, like, we were able to then like kind of pull it back and then get back to this idea of seeking to understand one another. As I've been reflecting on that conversation, as much as I would say, like, a lot difficult conversations have been a lot of my personal career, I know they've been a lot of your career as well.
Yeah.
But what I really started to kind of pull apart in thinking about this conversation and relaying it to people as of late, it was more about like what was going on within me. Like, how did I know enough about myself, and based on the conversations you and I have had, to be able to like take control of some of those systems that just automatically kick off and start like, you know, defending. And so I kind of want to just talk about some of those things that I feel I started to experience and feel, in hopes that like maybe you've been in that situation and you know, what things you've done to help make it a productive conversation versus a shut down, walk away type thing.
I love that. And I love that you started like teed that up by saying, like, this is something that you learned and then that you chose, because first we have to like get the information that we actually do have agency. We can choose a different path. I think oftentimes we just sort of float through life and let it pull us in these different directions. And so we show up in these conversations not intentional in how we want it to go. And then that like, if you don't like the way that it feels when you're interacting with people and having these really tense, difficult conversations, you actually can choose a different path. Like you can change that, but also that like it does take intention.
Yes, for sure.
And just because you have learned about it doesn't mean like all of a sudden you've unlocked some level of enlightenment and now you never have to work at it, that it's still a lot of work, right?
Right. And I think that was one of the things when I look back at this experience, it's more of I had an awareness of like how I generally show up in these situations. And so, you know, sometimes the loudest conversation that's going on is the ones that are in our heads. And so we kind of like don't hear, and we're not truly like present in the conversation. And so we begin to miss things. And so that was like kind of my first aha as I was going through all of this, was this awareness shift of, I know that this is how I react in certain situations. And if I don't want that, and if I do truly want to seek to understand someone, like I have to be able to suspend those things.
Yeah.
And part of that for me, and I've said this, like I have big emotions. I have a very loud internal dialogue. And so I have to find a way to quiet that as I'm engaging in the conversation so I don't miss things. Does that, like, as you think back to conversations that you've had to figure out how to navigate, like, do you have a really loud internal dialogue, or are you more just going wherever emotion takes you?
Yeah, no, I think that's really most people are listening at that level one listening most of the time, which is listening to figure out how you're going to respond. And that's when that internal dialogue is like super loud. And we talk about all the time the neuroscience behind this, but you know, as you're receiving information, you're processing it, you're figuring out how it fits in. and you're determining what that means about your surroundings or your situation. And so,
Right.
particularly if you're talking about something that you've already associated as potentially like a intense topic that puts you on edge, your brain, is already pushing chemicals through your body to heighten your awareness of threat. And so it's much easier to be tripped or triggered. And in those cases, I think your senses get more in tune with
Right.
wanting to listen to respond because you're easily getting tripped into defensive. And I
Right.
think you and I both have, from a career standpoint, talked about how to diffuse the defensiveness and things that you can do when you enter a situation to set up the conversation so that people aren't as defensive, or to diffuse a level of defensiveness by, saying, hey, we all want the same thing. Or sometimes you say no through saying yes, but not in a way to trick people, just in a way to make the conversation safe. And then let's see where we go. So maybe saying
Right.
no by saying yes is a little not quite the right words, because that sounds like you're being deceitful. Not what I'm suggesting, but I think, back to answer your question, like, we need all three levels of listening. Level
Yeah.
one as listening to respond, level two as listening to understand, and level three as listening to the broader things that aren't
Right.
always said, or how is everyone else in the room reacting, or that is really hard. I
Right.
think particularly for me, I really struggle with level three listening because it's hard to take like full focus on multiple inputs at the same time for me. But Ace is very good at that.
Yeah. And we talked about that in that episode in
Yeah.
November. And so again, now that I am away from this conversation, looking back at it, like I can see how those of us who did stay, like, we were in tune and like watching each other's body language, things
Yeah.
that people were saying. And like we leaned into that conversation, and whether that was like a cognitive thing we were doing in that moment, or it's like, I don't think it was for me, because again, I was curious about like the things and story that this person, their history that brought them to their beliefs. So I was genuinely curious, but I think for the others who were staying, like being aware of how, their body language, how they were sitting, how they were either leaning in or pulling out, like it was just it's fascinating to like look back on.
There's this concept of leading from the sidelines, which I think is used in many different ways. But those are the words that come to mind for me when I think about probably what you were doing a little bit in this conversation, because people do tend to co-regulate. Mammals in general do. Dogs will do that. They talk about like dogs picking up on your energy and, all of those kinds of things. So people do the same thing where we pick up on each other's energy. And if you have a calm presence as you enter a difficult conversation,
Yeah.
then other people subconsciously can pick up on your calm presence and say, it's okay for me to be at ease, even though this conversation feels heightened. If you have a, manic or tense or stressed out or defensive presence, then other people will pick up on that too. And so you really can change the tone of a conversation without leading it, just by your nonverbals and how you're holding your shoulders and your head. And like there's some like leadership coaching that I've done in the past where I say, look, when I'm at my best, it doesn't mean it's, this is intentional. So it doesn't
Right.
mean I do it all the time. But when I'm at my best, if I am really stressed about something, I have to be really conscious to keep my shoulders down and my head up straight and put a calm smile on my face and be slow to react. Because if I want my team to, or the people that I'm in the room with, to not be stressed and panicking, and I want us to stay calm and work through an intense situation, then that's the best way to do that. So it's really interesting that you're saying you were noticing how everyone else in the room was reacting, and that some people got up and left. So fight or flight, they flew because they didn't want maybe to be in an
Yeah.
uncomfortable or intense conversation, because we do care about relationships, and we're not always,
Correct.
even if we're prepared or equipped, it's not always the moment for us. We're
Right.
not always able to put ourselves in the driver's seat. Sometimes you just want to be a passenger princess.
That's true. That's very true. And so when I look back at like the conversations that we have had, like we've talked about, how amygdala hijack, how it like
Yeah.
takes over our emotions, and it tries to take care of us. It tries to keep us safe. And so I do think, like looking back in that instance, like it was a choice that I like leaned into that conversation. So
Yeah.
I didn't have that hijack. And then as I was looking a little bit more into this, I found the polyvagal theory,
Yeah.
which is just basically your body is constantly asking you, am I safe right now? And it's, again, it's just a mode that is happening unbeknownst to us. And then based on its answer, it either puts us in the you're good, so we're calm, we can connect with one another, we can openly joke, or like you're activated. So all of a sudden I'm feeling anxious or nervous, and maybe I'm being a little bit more guarded or protected, or I'm shutting down, I'm checking out, I don't want to be part of this because I have to protect myself.
Yeah.
And so just like as I was thinking about all of this stuff, the thing that like really shocked me is like those are not conscious choices that we're responding to. It is our nervous system responding to try and take care of us.
It's all happening in the background,
Yeah.
but you still can influence and control that, actually.
Correct.
So let's talk about the polyvagal theory, because this is, I think, a really interesting concept. And it's something that my sister and I have actually talked a lot about.
Okay.
So you've heard of fight or flight, and you've probably heard of like fight or flight or freeze, right?
Right.
So with the polyvagal theory, it kind of takes this fight or flight or freeze and puts them into like tiers. So think about like a ladder, for instance, which I don't know if that's the best analogy, but we're going to work with it. So like your step base rung of the ladder is like your, hey, I'm feeling good. Like this is what should be homeostasis if you are regulating well. And then your second tier of the ladder is like the fight or flight piece. And so that's like your amygdala making a choice about, hey, this might be threatening. Do I need to lean in and fight, or do I need to run away? And then so you're a little uncomfortable. If you're afraid of heights, this works really well. And then
you're familiar with it.
Third tier of the ladder, this is where you're like, oh, I am far off the ground. And yes, it does equate to the third step on the ladder for me. And that's where you're like really freaking out, like you're really amped up. And so you're going into just freeze, collapse, I can't do anything mode. And it was really interesting because I was having this conversation and I was going, oh, like, yeah, I find myself freezing. I remember specific times when my kid was growing up and like little toddler stage and would do something like ride the farm tractor down the stairs, and where you want to just like you see it happening and you want to just run to save, and you just get frozen. And so I would like spend a lot of time panicking, like I'm in this I don't have the fight or the flight. I just have the freeze mode. And so what happens if somebody comes up and like tries to harm me? Am I just going to get frozen? What's going to happen? Now we know I definitely have both fight and flight in me. Feisty.
To say the least.
Is in my nature. But what I learned is that, and this makes sense because we already know this, oftentimes in the moment when you get really escalated about something, it's about not just the thing that's happening, it's about all of the things that happened before. Correct. That your trigger is getting tripped on. Like all of the buttons. Like there was a situation we had while we were recording at some point in the last month where like something happened, I got upset, and like I just couldn't go on. And it was like not about what was happening, which I acknowledged. It was about like my triggers are getting tripped.
Yeah.
And I was in a place where like I just was already vulnerable for that. And just being able to acknowledge it's not about what's happening in this moment. It's about all of these other things, and they're things I have not yet dealt with. So those triggers are, those like levers are available to be pushed. And so what I learned is, using the polyvagal theory, if you find that you're getting pushed into that third rung of the step ladder and then you freak out and you are freezing and you just can't move, there's probably like a trauma trigger there. Something there that's tripping your trigger that you
Yeah.
need to reflect on, become aware of, and work to resolve, because you actually can change the pathways in your
Right.
brain when a trigger gets pushed so that it no longer puts you in this threat mode by working through it, acknowledging it, dealing
Yeah.
with it. You rewire those paths. And so this was the really interesting part, is that if you find you're on that third step of the ladder and you're in that like freeze mode, then you actually can work to rewire that so that then you find when that trigger gets tripped, you instead are only on that second rung of the ladder. And then, you can work through it so that that no longer becomes a trigger that gets
Right.
tripped anymore. So that was a really interesting conversation that we had, and like just something that I have been a little more in tune to or aware of. But when I think about polyvagal theory, I think of it as it's a really good awareness tool to know if I'm freezing, this is like, I'm really escalated. I'm beyond in this point. And so I need to like probably work on whatever might be tripping my trigger. And oftentimes in these difficult escalated conversations, because we can talk about things we disagree with, and like, how many holes does a straw have, and not get we animated, but we're not like triggered, right?
That seems awfully directed.
We're like animated, but we're not
Yes,
triggered, right?
correct.
Like, we're not in amygdala hijack. We're not like freezing. We're not any of those things, because it's not tripping some sort of like
Right.
trigger. So we can disagree, but it's not, like threatening. And
Correct.
I think that's what's really interesting, is why do I feel this way? Oh, like there's a threat here, but what really is the threat? Like, is
Right.
it threatening to me? Whether it's politics, whether it's, religion, is it threatening to me that other people believe different than I do? Like, no. So why do I feel like this is a threat?
Yeah. And I do think like those are the questions in reflective moments, right? Because when you're on that third rung, you're not really being reflective in that moment. You're just trying to like survive.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, once you've already slid down the path,
Right.
that's not the moment that you're going to get a handle on reflection. You're going to have to do that after all the hormones kind of calm down,
Right.
and you come back around to it.
But I do think I think a lot of times where people maybe reflect on difficult conversations, it's more of the, oh, I wish I would have said, or "Oh, this should have been my comeback." Like, we're instead of like trying.
How do I avoid being put in that kind of situation ever again? I'm just not going to talk to any of these people.
Right. And so I think like in those instances, we have to like change the question that we're at. Like, I think one of the things is, and again, I credit a lot of this into all the things that you and I have talked about over the last year. Like, when I'm reflecting on those things, and I start to ask myself, well, why are we still here? Like, why are we still reflecting on this? Why are we giving this time? Why are we giving this attention? Like, even if it's just like internal dialogue that's happening, like, so then I begin to ask myself, like, was I feeling triggered? Did I not like what they said? Is it something about like my personal beliefs that I feel were being triggered? So it's like being able to reflect back and being open to, why did this hit me? Why am I feeling threatened? Versus like, I'm ramped up and ready to go for round 2 and they come for me. Like,
Yeah.
It's like change. If you want to show up differently in those conversations, you also have to ask yourself different questions, and you have to like, are you going for the fight? Or are you seeking to like understand? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think like not to talk specifics of politics, because whatever you believe, you're welcome here, and we want to have a conversation that everyone feels like that they can relate with and take something from. But when we think about just political conversation in general, I think one of the things that you tend to see is language being used that is aimed at tripping people's triggers. Because if you get tripped into fight or flight, you will take a desired action that creates more putting people into different camps. And that's how you like rile up the base, whether for or against. I mean, there is a time for rallying the troops when you go to war, right? And that is sort of what politics has felt like, is that we're like dividing into camps and going to war. And I think there have been times in American history where it has felt more like that, but this feels like one of those times where that has just become incredibly extreme, and
Yeah.
you need the extremeness in order to like divide people. And
Yeah.
I've said this before, I think, united we stand, divided we fall. Division is what's needed in order for people to personally gain.
Right.
But then also, when you feel like somebody is attacking you, your response is to to fight, to
Right.
push back, right? And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't fight or stand up for what we believe in, but we should also be aware that this isn't by it's by design that
Right.
certain words are being used to trip triggers. And so when you spend your time, whether it's like glued to news media, or whether because they want more, they're trying to generate more consumption because that's how they make
Yeah.
money. And so those news channels that are not just about let's state the facts, but that use some of the inflammatory language, which is most of your like typical news channels. And I'm not just talking about TV channels, I mean in general.
Right.
Like
it's
that,
trying to make a connect, like it's trying to drive
keep you
something.
coming back, right?
Right.
Because if you're in that cycle where you're triggered, you're just going to keep coming back. Same thing with, like social media, right? So the people that are out there putting a lot of information on social media, like influencer accounts, make money when they get reactions.
Correct.
And so you're incented by the social media platforms to lean in to the kind of language that riles people up to get more reactions, which generates more visibility. And so, I think just being aware of the things that you're hearing and seeing sometimes by design are tripping your triggers. And so if you are feeling like you are constantly in that spin, that might be something you want to think about how you want to participate. And I'm not saying you should not participate in the news. I'm not even saying that you should not participate in social media. What I am saying is that maybe if those are things that you're experiencing, be aware that somebody might be tripping you by design, and then put yourself back in a position of power to decide what you're going to consume where and how much.
Right. And I think that goes to that self-awareness piece, right? Like understanding what your triggers are, understanding what that may feel like physically within you, understanding how you may be acting or reacting to things. And even outside of politics, right? Like this happens in our relationships. You used the example from a couple of weeks ago. Just last week, Frank and I had a encounter that did not leave either of us feeling great. And instead of being in that moment and pushing harder, I removed myself from it. And we came back later to have a conversation about it. I think it's what I am becoming very appreciative of in this space that we have here is this idea of the self-awareness and really looking back on things and trying to understand how did I end up here? How do I either re-engage in a way that is productive, or in some instances it's how do I show up differently because I didn't get my desired outcome, not in trying to be a manipulative way or something like that, but we didn't get through the conversation because we got too heated, that type of thing.
That didn't feel good. How do I go? I think in the situation I was referencing that happened with us while we were, recording, I think I said the words I don't know where to go from. I don't know how to recover from this. I just need time.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed by having feelings about all of this, right? But I do think sometimes we find ourselves in those places. And a year ago, I would have said, my goal is to learn how to never be in this place again. Because let me just tell you, I've renamed therapy to Fun with Feelings. And I mean that really sarcastically. I would love to tell you about my feelings when I'm in the moment of having them, but I really don't want to have to actually think about my feelings and deal with them. And if we could just be robots, I'd be a lot more comfortable. And then I'll tell you where I am on my journey of therapy.
See, I just think you would try to hack the system and change the robots.
Oh, can I genetically modify my own code so that I don't I am
Just cut these pieces out.
way more comfortable in the like thinking space,
Yeah.
versus the feeling space. And
Yeah.
it is not that I don't have feelings. You can attest. I have big feelings all the time. Feelings make me uncomfortable. Being in touch with my own feelings makes me uncomfortable, which is how I get caught in the trigger because I am avoiding what I am feeling. And then when it
Right.
gets tripped, I am on a journey that I can no longer control in that moment. And so taking all the tools that I've learned to be able to not be the bull in the china shop in that
Yeah.
moment and like try and recover from that. But I think, a year ago, I would have said my goal is to never have those moments.
Yeah.
And now I would say my goal is to understand when I'm caught in them, have them less, understand when I'm caught in them, and know how to get out of them gracefully.
I think that's a really good goal. But I do think like that's part of it, right? Is like you have to understand like how you want to be in those moments. And
Yeah.
look, whenever you're not used to it or you're like it's something you may not have been prepared for, like it's hard to in those moments control all of these things that are happening within us. And so we are likely not showing up as gracefully. We are likely not showing up as our best selves. And so then it's like in those reflective moments, like as much as we would love to design our lives and not have to encounter things that make us uncomfortable or,
Oh my gosh.
like
Can we
it's
just like
that's just not
cut
the real
out all
world.
those? They say there's a season for everything, but can we just cut? I think there was a question asked, like, um, can you have good without the evil? Can you have the good moments without the bad moments? Can you really appreciate all of the high points without having ever experienced some of the low points?
Yeah.
Like when I think about my hands and how grateful I am to have hands, it's like born from moments of my hands like really hurt and they feel like, the weather is changing. And, and then I think, but you know what? Like I've been ignoring them.
Right. I have a different appreciation for
I'm
them.
actually quite grateful for them as opposed to just taking them for granted. And so I think it's a really good, while I'd like to trim out all those moments that are undesirable, I don't really want a life that's just like flat.
Right. Exactly.
I want to be able to experience life fully, the highs and the lows.
Exactly. And I think whenever we understand like that's what we're seeking and understanding that the interactions that we have in life are unfortunately not always within our control, how can we show up in those ways and have the self-awareness to be able to, when you enter them, start to navigate it with that grace that you spoke of earlier?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, you had a conversation in your own home that didn't go so well. And so we would classify that as a difficult conversation, even if it wasn't like going in, this is a topic that's going to be a difficult conversation. Sometimes you just find yourself in the middle of it and you realize that those are the times that are most confusing to me because I am trying to logic my way around it. That's where I'm most comfortable. I don't understand why this is a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
And then I just am more comfortable being in the confused space.
Well, and like in that instance, it wasn't so much that either of us were seeking to be right or any of that. It was more about like the situation that was happening was like a family thing. And in the end, like we both wanted the same thing.
Yeah.
But how we were articulating it and how like in the moment of where everyone was from an emotional standpoint was not at the same place.
Was not getting there. Yeah.
Right.
And I love that you said that. There are two things that I have learned over the last few years. One of them is, and I would say one I learned in Crucial Conversations training many years ago, which is when you feel at odds, the best thing you can do is go out a layer and out a layer and out a layer until you hit where you agree, and then start from that place of agreement and work your way back in. Because if you go out to find where you do agree, and then you start to narrow it in to the place that you disagree, that conversation around the tactical or the how or the segmentation or whatever that is becomes a little easier to have, and it's a little safer because you can remind yourself you've got a barrier of agreement containing this space of disagreement. So it doesn't feel quite so wild. Not really the way that it was put in this training, but how I understand it or think about it. And then I think the other thing is you have to meet emotion with emotion and logic with logic. And so just because I'm not, although I have big emotions, just because I'm uncomfortable in exploring my emotions or somebody else's emotions doesn't mean that when they're responding from emotion, I can meet them with logic and expect for that to be a good outcome. And so I find that, if somebody is telling me, oh, I feel this way, and then I'm annoyed because it's not logical, and then I respond with logic, they're left feeling like they did not get what they needed from me. And then I'm left feeling like, what did you want from me? Like, why did you come to me with this emotional plea? And yet when I have an emotion and I go to them and they meet me with logic, then I'm irritated, right?
Yeah.
And typically then also get hooked into okay, well, you're right. And I'm just hard on myself because I can't meet myself with emotions, right? I think it's also what you have to do internally is say, all right, well, I'm feeling this way. I can't just logic my way out of it. It's part of being kind to yourself. I'm
Right.
feeling this way. And so right now I'm just going to meet myself with feelings and say, you know what? It doesn't matter whether it was rational or not. It's okay that you felt that way. I'm so sorry.
It's
Sometimes
so
you do have to
funny.
talk to yourself.
It's so funny because I feel like you and I are on like different sides of this spectrum, right? Like where I think you lean towards the logic to seek the homeostasis place for yourself, where I'm more on the emotional side. And yeah, whenever we are in these heightened spaces and we come to one another, like the reflection that we get out of each other is, and maybe it's because we've known each other for a while and we're able to understand like how to show up for one another and better understand. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's a lot easier said than done until you start putting it into practice, and then you can start to understand what those triggers are, how you're getting into certain spaces so that you can stop yourself, or reaching out to others to help you better understand maybe something that you're too close to understand right now.
Well, I think between you and I, there is this like level of vulnerability that we're willing to be with each other that I would say is not something that's like like that I have with many people. And so I think there's a little more grace that we're able to have with each other. And also like not everyone can hold the mirror that you hold up for me without getting punched in the face.
That's a warning for everyone out there.
That plastic fork that I carry around.
Exactly.
Because I think that we do have that shared understanding of like, we're here for each other. We want the best for each other.
Yes.
We give each other a lot of grace. And so I do think there are moments where maybe we are a little more depleted ourselves. And so things just get a little more on edge, and you can notice that. But I also am like super grateful that we have this relationship where we don't have we can be vulnerable with each other without having these big explosive moments. Because I think that's not something I'm used to in life is getting to be close to somebody without like having the discomfort of that vulnerability. And maybe it was like this like slow sinking into that versus the like you get to know somebody and you know everything about them, like from the immediacy. But I'm not really sure what it is. Maybe it's just
it's so
kismet.
interesting that you say that, because like going through a lot of stuff personally, professionally, all of the things, and I've engaged in many difficult conversations over the last several weeks. And I hadn't really thought about that vulnerability piece. Like I've been talking about it in the form of trust. But I hadn't been thinking about it from a vulnerability standpoint. And looking at it from that place, I can now start to see why I'm feeling frustrated, because I'm someone who gives trust easily, but you break my trust and we're going to have issues. I want people to know that I'm a safe space and like I can engage in conversations and not like come to throws about it, and whenever you're first getting to know people and you're first like really beginning to build relationships and form understanding of one another, it doesn't always naturally just feel that connected. Like you were talking about. So I just got to give it time.
I mean, when I think about vulnerability, that song plays in my head, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. Like I think of vulnerability is the darkness, the dread. I hate it. I hate being vulnerable. I hate feeling vulnerable. There's like obviously some stuff to work through there. But
Have you talked about that correlation with your therapist?
oh, I'm sure we have. I'm sure it's come up. I'd like to not reflect through those moments.
Well, speaking of reflection, like I do just want to say like kind of what I figured in doing all of the reflecting that I did from this conversation that happened, the family dynamic one where politics came into the discussion. I was thinking a lot about like that conversation we had back in November. And then again, as I put this different lens on it, I was like, oh, well, we definitely hit like the external factor of like how to engage. But then as I was kind of peeling back the layers of it, I was like, we didn't really talk a lot about like those internal things. So as I've been reflecting, one of the things I've noticed was like truly understanding my triggers and being able to understand whenever I start to feel like whether it's a tightness in my chest or some people start to speak really fast when they are in a place of feeling triggered. I struggle to find words when I am in a place of feeling triggered. So not one of mine. This urge to interrupt, which I find fascinating because I used to work with someone who would actively acknowledge that they were interrupting you. And I had seen this person do it many times to my colleagues. And finally they did it to me one time and they acknowledged it. And I just told, like, I was speaking, Chris, I hate to interrupt you. And I was like, then don't do it. And that put them on their heels. And so we got through the conversation and I said, I want to go back to this because first, I appreciate that you're aware that you do this, but yet you push through it and do it anyway. Like, do you know how that makes you come across to people? And like, it built trust between us because apparently no one had told this person, like, when you acknowledge it, it actually makes you look like a bigger jerk versus like that you're understanding of yourself. So probably not like my best advice in building relationships, but I don't know. People can only be pushed so far.
I am the interrupter one is a vulnerable spot for me because I know I'm an interrupter.
I am not talking about you, Jen.
I know you're not. I know I'm an interrupter because when I do it, it's not like I don't say, oh, I know I'm interrupting, but like I actually am not aware, like I don't have that awareness until after. And it's oftentimes for me, it's not like a trigger sign. It's like I'm just so excited to be in the conversation and I already know how you're going to finish the sentence. And so like, let's just get to it faster. But like out of excitement, like, I know if you listen to the podcast, you can probably hear me do it here. It's just like not waiting for the thought to be finished because I already understand what they're saying. And, so logically, like, let's just,
I've
definitely somebody
also
at work did call me out on that and was sharing like that didn't make feel great. And I was like, oh my gosh, and they were like, I know where you come from. And it's not from a negative place. And I was like, I really appreciate you sharing. It is something that it's a vulnerable spot for me because it's something that I know I do and I don't want to do, but I don't always know I'm doing it in the moment. So would you just give me a signal when I do that so I can be more aware? But then I also just tried to be more hyper aware and then feeling bad about it and whatever. I'm working on it, guys.
Work in progress. So first it was like noticing my triggers and then we've talked about name it to tame it. So name what you are feeling. So whether it's I'm getting defensive, whether feeling misunderstood. I think in this exact conversation, I actually verbalized this because I wanted everyone who was like part of the conversation to be clear, like, I'm not trying to get us to change anyone's political beliefs or perspectives here. I'm seeking to understand like how you are coming to this decision or how you are hearing and processing information. One, needed to acknowledge that for myself because, it's not a threat. It's okay. We can discuss this, but also like just level setting with everyone who wanted to stay present for the conversation that like, this isn't going to be a knockdown drag out. We are not no winners are walking away from this conversation. Right.
And I think that's so good. And I also think it's really hard, especially for like some people that have a little bit more of that competitive nature
Yeah.
to stay in a curious space, or who are gifted in what's the word I'm looking for, in the world of like mythics and such. They call this, like in the fantasy novel world, they call it charm speak, but like people who are gifted with influence, the gift of influence. And like you and I have talked about this, it's a strength, right? It's a category of strengths, but I think it's really hard to stay in that place where you're being curious instead of responding with conviction.
Right.
Ace would call that when I go into lawyering mode.
So it has a name in your household.
It is Jen. That's the name. But sometimes you really do seek to understand, and then you like you said, you say it out loud so that you can remind yourself too, because, and then I think, as I'm just thinking as we're talking about this, I think it's okay to ask other people to hold you to that respectfully.
Correct.
Because if you do start, and you probably will, going towards the direction of trying to convince each other, then find a safe way to bring it back to, wait, everyone is just trying to be heard. We're coming from a place of curiosity. This is like, you see this in a less threatening way in the work setting, where you're trying to state the problem so that you all can get on the same page about solving the right problem.
Right.
But then people go into solutioning, and because you just want to get right to the point and start solving the problems. Like it feels very uncomfortable to have an unsolved problem. And so once you've named the problem, you go down the solving path, and it's like, no, we're not solutioning here. And it's so important to do that, because we have to spend the time to make sure we are actually trying to solve the same problem. Otherwise, the solutioning part gets ahead of itself, and maybe you're solving the wrong problems.
Right. And I think that goes to like the third thing that I learned was like, it's understanding that this is a human response. These are just the ways that we are hardwired to protect ourselves. And so it's not like hijacking the system, right? It's not like we're trying to change. You said it earlier, it's rewiring so that our bodies are now understanding like, this isn't a threat. Like, for someone to have a different belief from me is not a threat. It is an opportunity to get curious and lean in.
Let me just say, it absolutely can feel like a threat.
Yeah.
And when there are beliefs that are held, political, religious, that would attack somebody's existence, it's so easy to then get pulled into that and go, no, this is a threat. You are threatening my very existence, my right to live and breathe and be happy and all these things. And I think when we say it's not a threat, it's when you choose to enter a conversation that is out of a place of curiosity, in a space to understand in that moment, that conversation is not a threat. But I also must say, not everyone deserves your attention in these types of conversations. So if they are not going to enter this conversation in the same desire for curiosity, why are you wasting your time? Because it serves no purpose but just to spin you up. So be thoughtful, digitally or in person, when you choose to enter these conversations. Not every conversation opportunity is one that is worth picking up and having.
Correct.
And how did you decide that this was a moment and a time where this conversation was actually worth it? Were you seeing something from this other person that said they are also in a place where this doesn't have to be like a fight? Or
so the thing that made me lean in was that they had responded in a very definitive way of, I regret some of the decisions I've made, so I'm never going to do this again. And I was like, that doesn't sound like the right, like, whether we have the same or different political perspective, like, I did not agree with like what they felt their change needed to be.
So they were just moving to avoid.
Correct. And so in that instance, I wanted to better understand. And so the fact that they brought it up in a group of people who, pretty safe to say that all of us were within the same political realm. So the fact that they had said that in that setting,
and
to
they're
me
giving
was
up
like
this vulnerability too, of not only am I willing to say it here when I know that I'm outnumbered, but also I'm giving you a little in that I'm saying I do regret the outcome of
Correct.
what happened.
And so I think like in that instance, I was able to, one, like when we talk about vulnerability, someone's being vulnerable. And so
Yeah.
to me, that emotion side kicks in like, oh, well, hold up. Like, you know, we're all human. We all like no matter what we do, we all make mistakes. We all learn from them. That's part of living. But then the other side of that kind of kicked in was like, oh, I've never had someone this close that I could engage in this conversation
ask
and
these questions, understand a little better.
And I had challenged myself, like, based on conversations you and I had before, like, ooh, these are all great questions to ask, but we're never in the right space with people who want to engage in those conversations.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, I have one. So there was probably a little bit of like personal satisfaction going on that I could get some answers to questions, understanding like it's one person, right? They're not representing an entire
but like,
party.
where did you come from? Because I really don't get it. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And so, and those who decided to stick around, like everyone did. Everyone like stayed in that space. And when we did veer into, there was one part that it did get a little dicey, but someone else in the conversation who I think was like the youngest person who had just recently graduated college, like had the wherewithal to say like, none of us understand that part of the conversation. None of us are representative of it. None of us have walked in those shoes. Like we may have friends or people that we know, but that is not any of our story. So maybe we don't make assumptions and maybe we don't make these broad statements. And I was just like, wow, like because I was like engaging in the conversation.
You were like, yeah, let's talk about it.
Right. But I really appreciated that they were able to be like, hey, none of us know. We can't make that argument. We can't state what's the facts, what's the opinions, because that's not a place any of us come from. Yeah. So let's not use that as a place to start to let the conversation fall apart.
Yeah.
So I just thought, wow, what great perspective and a great way to stay engaged.
I love that. So what else would you say helps in having these conversations? So making sure we're being thoughtful about not every conversation is, not every opportunity is the right opportunity for this kind of conversation. So choose wisely. If you're going to get vulnerable by being curious, choose who you choose to be vulnerable with.
Right. Choose wisely.
Choose wisely. Come from a place of respect. When respect is not honored, have a way to graciously disengage.
Right.
But what else?
But also be willing to call that conversation over. Hey, this wasn't the purpose, so let's not let this ruin the party, or let's not let this ruin the moment. Like whatever, like use whatever out you can.
Graciously, though.
Correct. Yeah. Not like you're an idiot and walk away. Like that's not probably the best way to do it.
Seems like you're a little too emotional for this. That would not be a gracious way to.
No, that would not.
I think that's going to escalate it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think a lot of people are like, some language that people are using these days is like, choosing curiosity, ask questions to better understand, but then people aren't really doing that. Like they're asking them so that they can like have a better argument for the next time they engage.
The goal you have to commit to yourself is that you are not trying to get agreement or alignment.
Correct.
You are really seeking to understand. And so you have to change or to and. Both things can be true. This is something I've learned in therapy. Language I've learned. Both things can be true. Both point of views can have truth to them. And then also both can have untruth to them. And when we just come from this place of it's you or it's me, then you're putting yourself in a place where you cannot listen with curiosity. You can only listen to seek agreement or to prove somebody wrong and write them off. And so you have to first check whether you are in a place where you honestly can engage in seeking to understand and be curious. And if you can't, that's okay too. Just don't do it.
Right. And I think I love that you said that around both can be true, because I feel like a lot of times when a conversation becomes circular and people are arguing like two different sides and it's just not going anywhere, I frame that as a question. Like, but couldn't both of these be true? Like, you can feel this way, but also it not like it. Like it asking it in such a way that it then we're not arguing sides. We're then trying to see like actually these both are could and are likely reality.
Well, you often pick the extreme circumstances or isolated circumstances and then do this kind of thinking, a global language conversation around it. And so if you think about all of the topics that are like really polarizing in our culture, that's what ends up happening is we describe no matter which side of the argument you're on, the loudest voices are describing the extreme circumstances in both scenarios. And so we're just yelling at each other from across the chasm. And the fact is, like most of the situations that actually need to be solved, we could probably come to some agreement on. And we are not spending any of the time having those conversations. But in order to do that, we actually have to get vulnerable with each other and be willing to hear each other and set aside the extreme circumstances so that we can solve in the middle. And I think for a period of time, there was like an openness to that. And then it started walking back. And so I use that example because people do have big emotions about it, even if they don't know exactly where they land, because it's complex. Because we don't talk about the complexity of it. We talk about, we talk about it in binary terms.
Yeah. And I appreciate you putting that because ultimately that's what this whole reflection has brought me to is like the goal isn't argument, it's understanding. And like
but if
they
keep us arguing, they'll always win.
Right. And if we can't work through those things, like understanding those things that are triggering us, understanding like why we end up in certain places and why we can't, like why it feels like such a threat to our identities, if we can't work through those things in the moment because we are at a heightened state, take that time to reflect so you can show up differently in the conversation the next time. And I think if you can stay curious when it's uncomfortable, you become someone that people trust with hard conversations. And I will say, as someone who the majority of my career has operated within that space, I am totally aware that it's easy for me to say that. And and I will say, like, as someone who identifies with the LGBT community, anytime anyone like goes for it in a sense of my right to exist, I have a very hard time engaging in that conversation because how can I engage in a conversation with someone who doesn't even think that my voice is worth being heard? Like that's hard. That is a hard thing to, and it was through many conversations with you that I finally like came to that realization. Like that is a trigger that for some reason for me, I have a really hard time trying to rearrange my pathways to get into this curious spot because
well, I mean, how can you? Because you feel threatened and that threat feels very real. And so this is where I say, like, not everyone deserves your vulnerability to enter a conversation where there's a place of curiosity. This is a part of why, and I know I've mentioned this this series before, but the series You Can't Ask That, I think is what it's called on Netflix. It's a part of why I appreciate it so much because it is something you're watching. So the other person doesn't have to be present, which makes it a little safer to go in and watch these conversations. And I think the first one I started with was actually an episode on people that had killed somebody. And so it wasn't, something that I feel any like amount of conflicting over or whatever. But it is complex, right? And in the episode, it's like there's a whole myriad of different backgrounds or individuals. Somebody that killed somebody for work as I think a police officer or something. Somebody that accidentally backed over their child and killed them. And somebody that had an argument with a partner and killed them. And, so it was just it was a really interesting conversation to listen to and watch unfold, to just hear them talk through their experiences. And so then once I listened to that, then like creating this like place of, okay, I can enter this from a more curious place. Let me listen to some of these others that, are maybe a little more polarizing. You just like the questions that you just can't ask somebody, no matter how much you know that. But you can't understand the world that they're living in because you can't relate to it. And I really believe that, empathy is the ability to relate, to really understand somebody else's perspective. And the way that we like bridge the chasm is through empathy. And so like to be able to really listen and understand people's points of view that sit in some of these opposing chairs. Like I would walking into a conversation here that maybe gets uncomfortable, but but isn't that the whole point, right? Like I would really love to hear more of their perspective so that I could broaden my understanding of what might somebody actually be going through, what might their real feelings actually be, not because it's comfortable to acknowledge that those things actually happen, but because how can we make decisions about the hard stuff when we're unwilling to understand?
Right. Well, and whenever you're just building ideas and laws and things off of presumptions and assumptions, like that's not the place to start, because then everyone's in their own like corner yelling and screaming because we're not all starting from the same standpoint.
Yeah. And so if you're in a place where you feel like, hey, I'd like to be curious, but doing that live with somebody is just a little too vulnerable. I'd rather have something I can choose to turn off or take a break with, or isn't going to argue back with me, or I don't have to be a part of the conversation. You might look for like documentaries, or I just really think that this You Can't Ask That series was done in such a way that they really dove into and they got people willing to be on camera and be incredibly vulnerable. I mean, just the directors and producers, I'm just blown away by their gift here, but like really go on a journey to understand, walk a mile in somebody's shoes. The goal isn't to walk away having changed your mind or agreeing or disagreeing. It's just to have a level of empathy.
Exactly.
So, I love that.
Well, thank you for going on this journey with me. I appreciate, like I said, my gratitude moment is truly that we have had so many of these discussions. It has led us into spaces that have challenged the way in which I approach things, that I think about things, and I am actually seeing how it's showing up in like my real life. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. So thank you.
I'm more grateful for you than you could ever know.
So I guess my challenge to everyone who may be listening is, what's one conversation that you've been avoiding? And what would it look like if you entered it with curiosity instead of from a place of defense? How could that maybe change the way you would engage?
Yeah. How might we solve some of these unsolvable problems?
Yeah, like straws, 2 holes or 1.
Okay, no, that's just unsolvable. That's an unanswerable question. We're going to agree to disagree on that one. Disagree and commit.
And on that note,
the things that, if you can't disagree and commit on the things that don't matter, how will you ever disagree and commit on the things that do?
Exactly.
But don't forget to check us out on social media if you're not avoiding the scroll. We are at Chris and Jen ITM. That's our handle. Jen is 1 N and Chris is with a CH, just in case you were spelling it differently. We know people who do that are pretty cool. Check us out on our website, www.chrisandjenitm.com. ITM stands for in the morning because it's always morning somewhere. So
that's right.
We definitely want to hear from you. And until next time, be kind to yourself, to one another, and make it a great week.
Bye, everyone.